Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun has designated Saad al-Hariri as Prime Minister to form a new government. Hariri won the backing of the majority of the parliamentarians. Last year, he stepped down as Prime Minister in the wake of the nationwide protests against the ruling elite. Pakistan says any misadventure by India in Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan will get a firm response. At a weekly press briefing, Foreign Office spokesman Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said India should be mindful of its defense limitations, which were exposed in February last year and more recently in Ladakh. Civil rights groups have urged the United States and other countries to acknowledge that genocide was committed against Rohingya in Myanmar. A group of 35 organizations made the appeal ahead of a UN-backed Rohingya donor conference. The 2017 crackdown that prompted the exodus of thousands of Rohingya to Bangladesh is the subject of an ongoing genocide probe at the UN court. The number of coronavirus infections has surpassed 41 million worldwide, with over 1.13 million fatalities. India has recorded 702 deaths and nearly 56,000 infections overnight as its case load rises to 7.7 million. In Pakistan, 10 more people have died of the virus in the last 24 hours, taking the toll to over 6,700. Those were the headlines and detailed stories. Right after a short break, stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Lebanon, President Michel Aoun has designated Saad al-Hariri as Prime Minister to form a new government. Hariri won the backing of the majority of the parliamentarians. In a short address, Hariri said he will form a government of the non-partisan experts to implement economic and political reforms. He pledged to reconstruct Beirut from damage following the deadly explosion in August. The Hezbollah party did not vote for Hariri, despite being among the most enthusiastic proponents of his return. Last year, he stepped down from the post of Prime Minister in the wake of the nationwide protests against the ruling elite. For more on this, we are joined by Beirut-based analyst Diana Casey. Diana, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Saad al-Hariri is facing an arduous task of naming his cabinet. How will he overcome this challenge?
There are a lot of challenges now facing Saad Hariri after his appointment. For one thing, we need to understand that while he was appointed, he did not get the majority of the Christian support, and this in itself will form a great challenge when he is forming his cabinet. There is a clear division between who is with appointing him and who is not with him, and this of course will be reflected in on his efforts in forming the cabinet. Of course, there are a lot of talks now that everything now is in tandem and just waiting until after November 3rd, the infamous November 3rd, which is the American or the US elections.
So do you think that Hariri would be able to secure an IMF bailout package to tackle the country's worst economic crisis since the Civil War?
The IMF issue is definitely linked to the reforms that are on the table, whether they were placed on the table because of the Sadr conference or with the French paper that President Macron, he was so clear about. IMF will not be unlocked unless these reforms are done. Now, for the reforms to be done, there needs to be a political will. This so far does not exist. Is Hariri coming with such a political will? This is what we are waiting to see. Apparently, some analysts are saying that he does have that will.
Diana Casey, thank you for talking to Indus News exclusively. Now moving on, Pakistan says any misadventure by India in Azad, Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan will get a full spectrum response. At a weekly press briefing, Foreign Office spokesman said India should be mindful of its defense limitations, which were exposed in February last year and more recently in Ladakh. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the Indian leadership must not underestimate the level of preparedness of Pakistan's armed forces. The spokesman said that despite multiple challenges at home, New Delhi continues to act like a regional hegemon. The spokesman urged India to peacefully resolve disputes with the neighbors for a lasting peace in South Asia. Pakistan's President Dr. Arif Alvi says Islamabad attaches great importance to its cordial relations with Saudi Arabia. The president made these remarks during a meeting with Saudi envoy to Pakistan, Nawaf Saeed Al-Maliki. Alvi said Pakistan wants to further expand bilateral ties with the brotherly country for a mutual benefit of the two sides. President of International Islamic University, Islamabad, Dr. Hatal Hamoud Al-Utaibi was also present during the meeting. Dr. Alvi said he hopes the university will progress further under Dr. Al-Utaibi's leadership. The president asked him to strengthen global links between the institution and reputed foreign universities of Saudi Arabia. 12 civilians have been killed in a government airstrike in Afghanistan's northeastern Takhar province. A spokesperson for the Takhar's governor said 7 people were injured after a mosque was hit accidentally. A provincial council secretary said many of the victims are children. This comes after Takhar's deputy police chief said around 50 policemen were killed in the clashes with the Taliban. Azerbaijan says Armenian forces have targeted civilians in Siazan, Gabala and Kurdamir cities with ballistic missiles. Azeri head of the Foreign Policy Affairs, Hikmat Hajiyev, said Yerevan hit the areas from Gafan and Jarmuk regions. He said these actions by the Armenian forces amount to war crimes. Earlier, Turkey said it will send troops to support Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict if Baku requests. Turkish Vice President Fuat Oktay said Ankara will not hesitate to launch boots on the ground in Baku's favor. Turkey says it is open to the option of buying the Patriot ballistic missile defense systems from the US. In an interview, Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Ankara is willing to buy the US systems despite the purchase of the Russia's S-400s. Akar said buying Moscow's S-400 was a necessity and it does not mean Turkey's alienation from NATO. But he said Ankara will buy the US systems only if it guarantees the safe transfer of the technology, joint production and delivery schedule. He said Turkey cannot be dodged by Washington's contradictory statements on its willingness to sell the defense systems. The minister also confirmed that Turkey recently conducted tests of the S-400 defense systems. China says Washington's arms sale to Taiwan will have a major impact on Sino-US ties. This comes as the US State Department approved a sale of 3 weapon systems worth $1.8 billion to Taiwan. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said Beijing will respond appropriately as the situation develops. Earlier, the US State Department sent a formal notification to the Congress giving it 30 days to object to any sales. Taiwan has welcomed the development, saying the weapons will help improve its defensive capabilities. Defense Minister Yen Defa said Taiwan is not seeking an arms race with China. Last week, China urged the US to cancel the planned sales. Civil rights groups have urged the US and other countries to acknowledge that genocide was committed against the Rohingya in Myanmar. A group of 35 organizations made the appeal ahead of a UN-backed Rohingya donor conference. The conference is co-hosted by Britain, the United Nations Refugee Agency, the US and the EU. The 2017 crackdown that prompted the exodus of thousands of Rohingya to Bangladesh is the subject of an ongoing genocide probe at the UN court. In a provisional ruling in January, the International Court of Justice told Myanmar to take emergency measures to protect the Rohingya. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees has urged the international community to do more to find a solution to the crisis. The United States has accused Iran of interfering in the 2020 elections. The U.S. Director of the National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, said this in a news conference with FBI Director Christopher Wray in Washington. Ratcliffe alleged Iran sent spoofed emails designed to intimidate Democratic voters and incite social unrest. Ratcliffe said these actions are desperate attempts by desperate adversary. He also blamed Russia again for obtaining voter information.
This data can be used by foreign actors to attempt to communicate false information to registered voters that they hope will cause confusion, sow chaos, and undermine your confidence in American democracy. To that end, we have already seen Iran sending spoofed emails designed to intimidate voters, incite social unrest, and damage President Trump.
Iran's mission to the UN has denied the accusations. Spokesperson Ali Raza Mir Yousefi said Tehran has no interest in interfering in the US elections. Now, moving on, the OIC has voiced concern over the condition of a Palestinian who began a hunger strike 79 days ago. 49-year-old Meher al-Akhraz went on the strike against his detention without charge by Israel. He's currently in an Israeli hospital suffering from heart pain and convulsions. The Israeli human rights group B'Tselem said Israeli authorities would be responsible for any consequences. The Gaza-based Palestinian Center for Human Rights has called on the international human rights groups to intervene to save the life of Akhraz. There are more than 5,000 Palestinians languishing in Israeli jails. An official Israeli delegation is in Sudan to discuss normalizing diplomatic ties with the African country. Israel's state broadcaster said the two government delegations will meet today in Khartoum. Speaking to media, Intelligence Minister Eli Cohen said Israel is very close to normalizing ties with Sudan. Tel Aviv's cabinet members have hinted that Washington will announce another normalization deal before the U.S. election. Earlier, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the U.S. is working diligently to get Sudan to recognize Israel. He made the remarks while announcing that the process of removing Sudan from the U.S. list of terrorism-sponsoring states has begun. The global toll of the COVID-19 cases has surpassed 41 million, with over 1.13 million fatalities. India has recorded 702 deaths and nearly 56,000 infections overnight, increasing its caseload to 7.7 million. In the US, the death toll has crossed 222,000, while over 8.3 million people have been infected. Latest on the pandemic in this report.
Healthcare systems in a number of countries are being overwhelmed as the second wave of COVID-19 takes the world by storm. In Europe, authorities in countries from Poland to Portugal have expressed mounting alarm at the renewed crisis confronting their health infrastructure. The growing number of cases in France, coupled with the setting in of winter season, has swamped the hospitals. Meanwhile, Spain has become the first European country to exceed 1 million coronavirus infections.
Over the last week, we've seen, and that has been a phenomena in all of Barcelona and Catalonia, an increase in cases needing emergency assistance for COVID patients and a consequent increase in critical patients. Now, we can say that we have 14 patients in our ICU, that is to say more than in September, and we already have quite a few more hospitalized patients who practically occupy 2 floors instead of 1.
5 of the countries with the highest cases are in Latin America. Pan American Health Organization says the region is not out of pandemic's first wave. It has urged LATAM countries to not relax measures aimed at containing the spread of the virus until vaccines become available. Meanwhile, in Argentina, some 70,000 health workers have been infected with COVID-19 so far. Healthcare workers in the country have taken to streets to demand better working conditions.
Our working conditions and salaries are precarious, insecure, illegal, and very dangerous. We are dying because of working conditions. In our country, we have had more than 100 deaths because of working conditions. In Buenos Aires, it's 11. So 10% of deaths are happening in the capital, which is meant to be where health workers are better prepared.
Over in Australia, Melbourne's 5 suburbs have been put on high alert after new infections sparked fears of a fresh outbreak.
Pakistan's COVID-19 death toll has exceeded 6,700 after 10 more people lost their lives to the virus overnight. The health ministry says 736 people tested positive for the disease in the past 24 hours. The ministry said there are over 9,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said that out of 325,000 countrywide cases, more than 309,000 have recovered so far. The ministry said over 142,000 cases have been detected in the Sindh province, while Punjab has reported over 101,000 cases. In the capital, Islamabad, over 18,000 have been infected so far. US President Donald Trump and his predecessor Barack Obama have directed blistering attacks at each other during rival rallies. Obama delivered a sweeping condemnation of Trump, urging the voters not to sit out the November 3rd elections. What in this report?
Just 13 days to go before the United States presidential election, the gloves are off. Former President Barack Obama and President Donald Trump have gone all out against each other at election rallies. In his first in-person campaign pitch for Democratic candidate Joe Biden, Obama blasted Trump's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, his response to racial unrest, and his fundamental unfitness for the job.
But I did hope, for the sake of the country, that he might show some interest in taking the job seriously. But it hasn't happened. He hasn't shown any interest in doing the work, or helping anybody but himself and his friends, or treating the presidency like a reality show that he can use to get attention. And by the way, even then his TV ratings are down. So you know that upsets him.
Biden has been off the campaign trail all week, preparing for the final presidential debate later today. Meanwhile, Trump has been working overtime, holding rallies across the battleground swing states. At a rally in North Carolina, he said Obama has not been able to get over Trump's 2016 victory and has been fuming over it every single day.
But before that, he said he will not run. He didn't know me. Then I ran. Then he said he will not get the nomination. Then I got the nomination. Then he said he will not be our president. Then I won. I think the only one more unhappy than Crooked Hillary that night was Barack Hussein Obama. The only one. Barack Hussein Obama.
Trump and Biden will face off today in the last presidential debate before the 2020 election, while Obama will next hit the crucial election state of Florida, which has 29 electoral college votes.
The U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee has approved President Donald Trump's nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to a lifetime Supreme Court seat. The nomination was approved despite a Democratic boycott of the meeting. Before the vote began, Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham called it a groundbreaking moment for conservatives. Conversely, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said Barrett's nomination has been a sham process. Trump nominated Barrett to succeed the late liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Russia has granted former U.S. intelligence contractor and whistleblower Edward Snowden permanent residency rights. Snowden's lawyer confirmed this in an interview, saying this is a step towards a Russian citizenship for his client. Anatoly Kucherena said the residency permit of his client was expiring and they asked for its extension. He added the pandemic had made the process longer than usual. Kyrgyzstan said Snowden was not considering applying for a Russian passport at this stage. US authorities have for years wanted Snowden returned to the country to face a criminal trial on espionage charges brought in 2013. The European Parliament has awarded Belarus opposition its annual Human Rights Prize in support of the country's protests. European Parliament President David Sassoli said his message for the opposition is to stay strong and resolute in their fight. The Parliament named 10 opposition figures in its award statement, including the main leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Nobel laureate author Svetlana Alexievich was also among those awarded by the EU. Tens of thousands of people have been marching through the streets of Belarusian capital Minsk every weekend since the presidential election in August. The protesters denounce what they say is President Alexander Lukashenko's attempt to prolong his 26-year rule. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Kyrgyzstan, the parliament has voted to delay an election to await a constitutional reform promoted by acting president Sadir Japarov. The move boosts Japarov's chances of staying on as full-time leader. The vote means Japarov has enough support to trigger a referendum that could delay the rules for the upcoming presidential poll. Earlier this month, the country was rocked by protests against the result of October 4 parliamentary elections. Protesters seized the government buildings and forced President Suranbay Jeenbekov to resign and the vote to be annulled. They also got Japarov released from prison, allowing him first to be elected as Prime Minister and then to take over as acting president. Spain's parliament has rejected a motion of no confidence in Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez launched by the far-right Vox party. The motion was rejected by 298 to 52 votes. Vox said the minority leftist coalition government had botched the handling of the coronavirus pandemic. In a speech, People's Party head Pablo Casado said Vox's proposal helped reinforce the minority leftist coalition government's grip on power. This comes a day after Spain became the first nation in Western Europe to pass 1 million coronavirus infections. In Nigeria, a detention facility has been set on fire as authorities struggle to enforce a curfew imposed to contain anger over a crackdown on anti-police protesters. This comes after security forces offered to deploy in Lagos to protect key businesses and the government sites amid anti-police protests. But Amnesty International has condemned the security forces over excessive use of force and allegedly killing 12 people. The Nigerian army has dismissed the accusations as fake news. Unrest was sparked 2 weeks ago after a viral video allegedly showing police officers killing a young man. In Thailand, the government has ordered the lifting of emergency measures imposed to curb ongoing protests. In a statement, the government said the violent situation has eased. It read the situation now allows the government officials and the state agencies to enforce regular laws. For past 3 months, Thailand has been marred by protests against Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. The demonstrators were also demanding slashing of Thai monarchy's powers. Thai lawyers for human rights said the police have arrested at least 80 people for taking part in the demonstrations. In Thailand, at least 3 people have been killed and 28 injured in an explosion on a gas transmission line in Samut Prakan province. In a statement, the company said it has joined local rescue teams to bring the wounded to the hospital. It said the fire had been brought under control and that gas going into that pipeline had been stopped. A company official said gas supplies had been restored for industrial customers and power plants. NATO says 2020 will be the 6th consecutive year of increased defense spending by European allies and Canada. Speaking ahead of a virtual meeting of the alliance's defense ministers, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said he is hopeful this trend will continue. He also said NATO will continue reducing tensions between Greece and Turkey in the eastern Mediterranean.
COVID-19 has not made all the challenges go away, so it remains vital to invest in our defense. At this ministerial, we will discuss our progress toward fairer burden sharing.
3 crew members of the Soyuz MS-16 mission have returned to Earth after undocking from the International Space Station. The trio, comprising 2 Russians and 1 US astronaut, landed in Kazakhstan. Chris Cassidy and Anatoly Ivanchnin and Ivan Wagner spent 196 days in orbit after arriving at the space station on April the 9th. NASA and Roscosmos have reported that all 3 astronauts were well. As part of COVID-19 precautions, the rescue team meeting the crew was tested for the virus. The 3 will leave for home after a brief medical checkup. NASA's Kate Rubins and Roscosmos' Sergei Ryzhkov and Sergei Kutcheverkov arrived at the orbiting outpost a week ago for a 6-month stay. British artist Banksys' remix of a masterpiece by Claude Monet has sold for more than $9.88 million. The 2005 work was auctioned in a live stream by Sotheby's in London.
One of the most important paintings of Banksys' provocative career.
Banksy, who has never revealed his identity, began his career spray painting buildings in Bristol, England. He has become one of the world's best-known artists. His Show Me the Monet was first displayed 15 years ago in London. The work is based on Impressionist painter Claude Monet's The Water Lily Pond. But here, the idyllic scene has been ruined by fly tipping, dumping of waste in undesignated areas. Paris Sales Room auctioned a Pablo Picasso painting, Tête d'Homme, for $5.2 million. While Japanese artist Kazuo Shiraga's painting Chikaisei Shinsanshi sold for more than $3 million.
The global pandemic has caused a major change in daily life routines all over the world. In many parts of the world, schools have been closed to try and combat the rising number of COVID-19 infections. But that hasn't stopped a few teachers in Naples, Italy, from finding a creative way to help children catch up on their studies. This report has details.
School teacher Pamela Buda has taken her class to public steps after educational institutions were closed in Campania region. 2 children are seated at a distance on each step, leaving just enough room for locals to walk past them. She doesn't want her students to miss out, especially as parents told her how tough no school has been for the children.
In truth, I had never thought to stop teaching. From the very start, I've been thinking about solutions with the help of the mothers to try and understand how they felt. After that, mothers called me and said that the kids are in a valley of tears. They're crying because they want to go back to schools, because they don't understand why schools need to be closed.
Buddha is not the only teacher in Naples finding alternatives with a bit of fresh air to the traditional classroom. Tonino Stonaiolo and his colleague have also found an interesting way of holding their classes. They divided their class into small groups of children who take class from balconies and outside on the streets of their homes.
Everything respecting the rules, because I think this emergency is serious in Italy and real. So everything we try to do is absolutely in respect of the rules and of the dramatic situation that we are living through. I want to find a way in which the kids could see us and share time with us, at least until we will be able to, and until a new possible lockdown is definitely avoided.
The credit for this goes to the dedication and ingenuity of the teachers and their love for children. One thing is for sure, though, the students seem quite happy to carry out their studying in the street. And who knows, maybe even the neighbors will learn something.
Paul McCartney will release McCartney 3 in December, 50 years after his first solo album. It is a new collection of stripped-back songs, all written, performed and produced by the ex-Beatle. Recorded this year in Sussex, it joins 2 other solo albums, McCartney and McCartney 2. They were created by the 78-year-old in 1970 and 80 when he was seeking a creative rebirth. Speaking of the album, McCartney said it was more about making music for yourself rather than doing a job. McCartney's most recent album is 2018's Egypt Station, and the musician was still touring last year. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Britain has announced resuming the post-Brexit trade negotiations with the European Union today. The initial phase of the negotiations will take place in London and will last for 4 days. Just a few days after announcing that the talks have ended, Downing Street said in a statement that it will discuss future ties with the EU delegation. It stated both the parties have jointly agreed on a set of principles for handling the intensified phase of talks. London said the meeting will try to bridge the Brexit's most difficult policy gaps between Britain and the EU. The Wall Street stocks have traded flat amid uncertainty around fiscal stimulus talks and the US presidential election. Markets got a slight lift after shares of Tesla rose on strong earnings. At the start of the opening bell, the indices of S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite were trading 0.25% lower, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average Index was trading fractionally higher. Meanwhile, oil prices edged up but struggled to fully recover from the previous session's losses. In football, Bayern Munich beat Atletico Madrid 4-0 in their Champions League opener. With this victory, Bayern have stretched the winning run in the competition to 12 games. Winger Kingsley Coman scored twice while assisting in another. Coman put Bayern ahead in the 28th minute, later setting up Leon Goretzka to fire in the second in the 41st. Corritin Tolisso killed off any Spanish hopes of a comeback with a sensational shot in the 66th minute. Atletico came close just once in the entire first half with Luis Suarez. Time to take a look at the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.